won't believe what went down when Snoop Dogg decided to hit up one of the most exclusive boutiques in town. What started as a simple shopping trip turned into something absolutely unforgettable. Stick around until the end, trust me, you won't want to miss a second of this. And hey, don't forget to subscribe and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The sun was sinking behind the Los Angeles skyline, painting the city in a deep orange glow. The streets buzzed with life as Snoop Dogg leaned back in the plush leather seat of his Escalade, soaking in the vibe. Tonight was supposed to be all about celebration. His latest album had dropped to critical acclaim, and now it was time to kick back, unwind, and treat himself. His phone vibrated in his hand. A message from Jason popped up. "Yo, we outside the spot. Can't wait to see what you got in store for us tonight." Snoop smirked, tapping out a quick reply. "Pulling up now. Be ready." He put the phone down and glanced out the window, his eyes locking onto the glowing storefront of Eminence Couture, one of the most exclusive high-end fashion boutiques in the city. Just the name alone screamed wealth and status. Through the massive glass windows, Snoop could see mannequins draped in designer pieces that practically whispered, "You can't afford me." But for Snoop, that was never a problem. He'd been rocking custom suits, diamond-encrusted chains, and sneakers so rare most people would never even lay eyes on them. But tonight wasn't about flexing, it was about rewarding himself and his crew. As he stepped out of the Escalade, the valet rushed over with a respectful nod. Cameras flashed from across the street as paparazzi spotted him, but Snoop barely paid them any mind. Adjusting his jacket, he made his way toward the entrance where Jason, Tina, and his two young protégés, Mick and Rico, were already waiting. Jason's face lit up the second he saw him. The man, the myth, the legend, Snoop Dogg in the building, he grinned, pulling Snoop into a handshake that turned into a hug. "Y'all ready to do this?" Snoop asked, eyeing the boutique. "Been a minute since I treated myself." "More like overdue," Tina chimed in, flipping her braids over her shoulder. "You work too hard, boss. Time to spoil yourself." Snoop chuckled. "That's the plan, baby girl. Let's get it." The boutique's doors swung open, and as they stepped inside, they were greeted by the crisp scent of leather, expensive cologne, and freshly pressed linen. The place was immaculate, polished marble floors, golden display shelves, and spotlights shining down on designer pieces from the biggest fashion houses in the world. It felt less like a store and more like an exclusive club where only the elite were allowed. Snoop's eyes immediately landed on a sleek black designer jacket, the fabric shimmering under the lights like liquid onyx. Then his attention shifted to a rack lined with limited edition streetwear. Hands in his pockets, he strolled over, scanning the collection like a hunter searching for the perfect prey. A few feet away, a young store clerk stood behind the counter, watching them like a hawk. His expression? Smug. Too smug. His eyes darted from one member of the group to the next, sharp and judgmental. He didn't greet them. Didn't offer any assistance. Just hovered, tapping on his tablet like he was waiting for something to go wrong. Jason leaned in, voice low. "You see this dude watching us like we about to rob the place?" "Ignore him, Jay," Snoop muttered, still focused on the rack. "Same story, different spot." Tina rolled her eyes. "Yeah, but it still ain't right." Snoop pulled a black t-shirt off the rack, holding it up to his chest. It was clean, sharp, just the right kind of statement without trying too hard. "This right here," he nodded, checking the fit in a nearby mirror. "This the one." But just as he was about to fold it over his arm, the store clerk materialized behind him like a shadow. And before anyone could react, he reached forward and snatched the shirt right out of Snoop's hands. "Sorry, sir," the clerk said, voice dripping with condescension. "But this item isn't for you." The boutique went silent. Jason's jaw clenched as he took a step forward. "What the hell you mean, not for him? Do you even know who this is?" The clerk smirked, tilting his head. "Doesn't matter who he is, sir. Some items are reserved for certain clientele. You understand?" Then, like nothing had happened, he turned his back and started walking toward the display rack. Snoop's expression darkened. And that's when everything changed. Snoop took a slow breath, steadying himself. He'd been here before. Not this exact store, not this exact clerk, but this exact situation. He glanced at Jason, who looked ready to explode. Tina's face twisted in disbelief. Rico and Mick just stood there, confused and angry at the same time. You serious right now? Jason's voice cut through the thick silence, rising with every word. Reserved clientele? My man could buy this whole damn store, and you talking about reserved clientele? The clerk turned, arms crossed, the smugness wiped clean from his face, replaced by something colder. If you'd like to browse something else, feel free, he said, voice detached. But if you're going to cause a scene, I'll have to ask you to leave. Jason took a step forward, but before he could move any further, Snoop placed a hand on his shoulder, stopping him in his tracks. His voice, calm but cutting, sliced through the tension. Nah, Jay. We ain't gotta do all that. We know what this is. Then he turned his gaze to the clerk, ice cold as ice. You think you're doing something right now? You think you in control? The clerk stiffened. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. His voice was louder now, as if trying to signal someone else, maybe another employee, maybe security. Tina stepped forward, her voice sharp. Don't worry. We're leaving. But you best believe you ain't seen the last of this. The group turned, their footsteps echoing against the pristine marble floor. Snoop was the last to reach the door. He paused, tilting his head slightly, voice low and edged like a razor. Enjoy that little power trip while it lasts. Then, he stepped outside. The cool night air hit them as they made their way back to the Escalade. No one spoke at first. Jason's hands were shoved deep in his pockets, his jaw locked tight. Tina's eyes burned with quiet rage. Rico and Mick kept looking back at the boutique, like they still couldn't believe what had just happened. Finally, Jason broke the silence. So we just gonna walk away? His voice was thick with frustration. We just gonna let them get away with that? Snoop's eyes stayed on the city skyline. They think they won, he said, voice steady. But they don't even know what's coming for him. Tina arched a brow. So what we gonna do? Snoop's gaze didn't waver. They think they get to decide who belongs. We about to show them different. They climbed back into the Escalade. Jason was still fuming, but he knew Snoop too well, he could see the wheels turning. The city lights flickered past as they pulled away from Eminence Couture, the boutique shrinking in the rearview mirror. Inside the car, the air was thick, heavy, the kind of silence that felt like a storm waiting to break. Snoop sat quietly, staring out the window. His reflection stared back at him, his face calm, his eyes sharp. Slowly, he reached for his phone, his fingers hovering over the screen for a moment. Then, he opened the camera app. This wasn't about a t-shirt. This was about something bigger. He pressed record. What happened tonight? I can't stay quiet about it. Y'all need to hear this. The video would change everything. Jason sat forward, elbows on his knees, tapping his fingers against his leg. His frustration was bubbling over. Tina leaned against the window, arms crossed, jaw tight, barely holding back her anger. Rico and Mick sat quietly in the back, still processing, still replaying the moment over and over. Snoop's hands rested on the wheel, his gaze fixed ahead. Calm. Cold. Jason exhaled sharply. Man, I still can't believe that clown had the nerve to snatch the shirt out of your hands. He rubbed his face like he was trying to erase the memory. Like we ain't supposed to be there. Like we ain't got the money to buy out the whole damn store. Tina turned, locking eyes with Snoop. So we really just walked out, huh? Just like that? Her voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. No yelling. No cameras in their faces. No scene. Not every battle gotta be fought with noise, Snoop replied quietly, his eyes still on the road. Sometimes silence hit harder. Jason scoffed. Man, silence don't hit nothing. That dude ain't thinking twice about it. He probably in there right now, laughing with his little coworkers, talking about how he handled us. His fists clenched. I shoulda handled him. Snoop's voice came sharp, cutting through the heat in the car. Nah, Jay. Jason turned, but Snoop didn't look at him. His eyes stayed locked on the road ahead. He think he won. He think that little power he got behind that counter means something. The Escalade rolled to a stop at a red light. Outside, neon signs flickered. Pedestrians passed by, lost in their own lives, oblivious to what had just gone down. Snoop inhaled slowly. Exhaled. Power ain't what you hold for a minute, he said, voice low, steady. It's what you keep. Jason shook his head, still fuming. Nah, man. This can't be it. They can't just keep. We're real. Every word, every story pouring in was proof that this wasn't just about him, or Jason, or Tina. This was bigger. This was about everyone who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. Snoop exhaled slowly, his fingers tightening around his phone. They feel this 'cause they been through it. 'Cause they tired, just like us. Jason leaned back, shaking his head in disbelief. Man, look at this. People from everywhere, New York, Atlanta, London, Paris. All saying the same thing. This ain't just a one-time thing. This is a whole system. Tina nodded, scrolling through another wave of comments. Yeah, and you just gave them the words they've been waiting to say. Rico and Mick sat across the room, their phones blowing up with notifications too. Mick looked up, his young face full of something between anger and determination. So what now? What's next? Snoop didn't answer right away. He let the weight of everything settle, the energy in the room buzzing like electricity before a storm. Then, he leaned forward, locking eyes with each of them. Now we move different. Tina raised an eyebrow. Different how? Snoop smirked slightly, but there was no humor in it. They think they controlled who gets to sit at the table, who gets to wear what, shop where. They think they get to decide who belongs. But that stops now. We ain't knocking on their doors no more. We building our own. Jason let out a low whistle, shaking his head. You serious? You trying to start something bigger? Snoop's gaze was steady. It already started. He tapped his phone. That video? It ain't just a moment. It's a movement. Tina smiled, the fire in her eyes burning just as bright. So we ain't just talking about clothes no more. Nah, Snoop said, leaning back. We talking about space. About ownership. About taking back what's ours and making sure the next generation don't gotta go through this same bulls. The room fell silent again, but this time, it wasn't frustration holding their tongues, it was focus. Because now it wasn't just about what had happened in that boutique. Now, it was about what came next. Snoop stared at his phone, scrolling through the endless wave of comments. We done waiting, he muttered, his voice low but firm. We done asking for respect. Jason glanced over, his energy still crackling from the night before. So what you got in mind, big homie? Snoop's fingers moved slow over the screen, his expression sharpening with focus. We building something bigger, he said, voice steady, unshakable. They want to keep us out? Fine. But next time they look up, they gon' see a whole new table. And guess what? Everybody's invited. Jason's grin spread slow and wide. I like that. I like that a lot. Snoop didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. Sometimes silence hits harder. Morning light cut through the blinds, casting golden streaks across the hardwood floor. The city hummed in the distance, but inside Snoop's living room, the air was thick, not with anger anymore, but with momentum. Snoop sat on the edge of the leather couch, phone in hand, scrolling through the explosion of reactions. The video had only been up for a few hours, but it was moving like wildfire. They did that to me last week at that same store, man. I walked in with my daughter, and they acted like we didn't exist. This right here is why I don't even bother with those elite places. Snoop said it best, we don't need their table. We build our own. Hashtags were everywhere. Hashtag table for all. Hashtag we belong. News outlets had already picked up the story. Headlines flooded social media. Snoop Dogg calls out Eminence Couture for discrimination. Celebrity speaks out against racism in high-end retail. We build our own, Snoop Dogg's viral stand against exclusion. Every platform wanted a piece of the conversation. Tina walked in, laptop tucked under her arm, her eyes locked on the screen. She dropped onto the couch next to Snoop, shaking her head in disbelief. "You seeing this?" she asked, her voice buzzing with energy. "You're everywhere. TMZ. Complex. Even CNN picked it up." She turned the screen toward him. Enough is enough. Snoop Dogg sparks a nationwide discussion on retail discrimination. Snoop glanced at the headline. He let it sit for a moment, then nodded. "Good," he muttered. "It's about time." The front door swung open, and Jason burst in, phone pressed to his ear, pacing like he was about to sprint. "Nah, man, I'm telling you, this thing is bigger than we thought. They begging for interviews. GQ. Breakfast Club. Even Good Morning America wanna talk." He pointed straight at Snoop. "They saying it's bigger than hip-hop, bro." Jason stopped pacing, locking eyes with him. "We gotta hit him back. This ain't just a moment. It's a movement." Snoop sat forward, rubbing his hands together. His eyes sharpened with something deeper, something more than just frustration. This was focus. "We don't just talk about it," he said, his voice deliberate, controlled. "We do something about it." Jason lowered his phone. "What you thinking? Protest? Rally?" Tina shook her head. "Come on, Jay. Protests only go so far. They march, they post, and then it fades." She leaned in, eyes locked on Snoop. "We need something permanent. Something they can't ignore." She looked him dead in the eye. "They took the shirt out of your hand, right?" Snoop nodded. Tina's lips curled into a knowing smile. "So we give them shirts they can't take away." Jason frowned. "What that mean?" Tina leaned forward. "It means we make our own. Our own shirts. Our own brand. They don't want us wearing theirs? Cool. We'll build one that's bigger than theirs. One that's for everybody." Silence settled over the room. But this wasn't an empty silence, it was the kind that comes when something big is being born. Snoop's eyes lifted slowly. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He tapped his fingers on his knee, seeing it all play out in his head, the name, the logo, the impact. Then he said it. "Table for all." Jason squinted. "Table for all," he repeated, letting it roll off his tongue. Then he nodded. Yeah, I like that." Tina's face lit up. A table where everybody's got a seat. No dress codes. No you don't belong here energy. Just us. Food. Music. Fashion. All of it. "This ain't just clothes, Snoop," she continued, her voice strong. "This is a statement." Snoop stood up, his posture shifting, his energy solid. "Not just a statement," he said. "A promise." Jason clapped his hands together. "All right. So what's first? We calling up some designers? What's the move?" Snoop was already walking toward his home office. He waved for them to follow. "Grab your laptops. We about to build something that's gonna make a lot of people uncomfortable." They gathered around the table, each locked in. Tina pulled up her design software, fingers flying as she sketched out concepts. Jason scrolled through a list of potential suppliers. Rico and Mick searched for printing companies that could handle bulk orders. The air was electric. Snoop leaned over Tina's shoulder, watching her design take shape. Simple, he said, but bold. Clean font. No gimmicks. Just the words, table for all. Big. Clear. Ain't no mistaking it. Tina nodded, her fingers moving fast. Got it. And just like that, the movement had a name. A brand. A purpose. The table was being built. And this time, everybody had a seat before Snoop leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his expression unreadable. Then he chuckled, not the kind that comes from amusement, but the kind that comes from knowing you already won. Let him talk. Let him scramble. They ain't ready for what's next. Jason smirked. And what's next, big homie? Snoop picked up the table for all shirt from the table, running his fingers over the gold lettering once more. The weight of it wasn't just fabric, it was years of being told where they could and couldn't go, what they could and couldn't wear. It was bigger than a brand now. It was a movement. He looked at the group, his family, his people, and then back at the screen filled with outrage, support, fire. We don't just sell shirts, he said, voice steady. We changed the game. Tina leaned in. I like the sound of that. Jason grinned. Yeah, let's show him what happens when we stop waiting for a seat and start building the whole damn table. Snoop nodded, flipping his phone over in his palm, already seeing the next step before anyone else. Bet. And just like that, the movement didn't just have a name. It had a future. Snoop leaned back, watching the fallout unfold in real time. They thought they could play us. Thought they could brush it off with some corporate nonsense. But the internet don't forget. And neither do we. Jason shook his head, still laughing as he scrolled through the endless stream of comments, memes, and receipts being posted. Man, this ain't just a boycott. This a whole shift. People waking up. Tina looked up from her laptop, her fingers still flying over the keyboard. And we ain't slowing down either. We got over 30,000 orders now. We need a bigger supplier, more hands on deck. This just got real. Snoop tapped his fingers against the arm of his chair, his mind already 5 steps ahead. Good. Let's scale up. We ain't just selling shirts, we selling a message. A movement. And they can't stop it now. Rico and Malik were in the corner packing boxes, working as fast as they could. Malik wiped his forehead. Bro, we gon' need a warehouse at this rate. Jason grinned. Warehouse. We gon' need a whole operation. A brand. A store. We bigger than them now. Snoop looked around the room, his team, his people, his family. Y'all see what we just did? He held up his phone, the table for all websites still flooded with orders. They tried to shut a door on us, and we built a whole new house. Tina smirked. And this one? Ain't nobody getting locked out. The next morning, the media frenzy was even bigger. News stations were covering the collapse of Eminence Couture's reputation. More former employees came forward, spilling the truth about the store's deep-rooted discrimination. One major news network called it the Snoop effect. Another called Table for All the brand that broke the system. By noon, Eminence Couture's stock had dropped 14%. Their high-profile brand partners were pulling away. Celebrities who once posed in their designs were now publicly distancing themselves. Snoop scrolled through the updates, then put his phone down, finally allowing a small smirk to break across his face. Jason leaned over. Yo, you smiling. That mean we won? Snoop exhaled, shaking his head. Nah, bro. This ain't about winning. He looked around at everyone in the room. This about making sure we never have to fight this fight again. Jason nodded, taking that in. So what now? Snoop stood up, grabbing one of the table for all shirts and slipping it over his head. He stretched his arms out, feeling the fabric, letting the weight of what they had built settle on his shoulders. Then he grabbed his phone, opened the camera, and hit record. What's next? He paused, locking eyes with the screen. We build bigger. We go further. And we don't stop till every single one of us got a seat at the table. And if they don't like it? He smirked. They better get used to it. The movement had started. And now, there was no stopping it. Snoop tossed his phone onto the table, his expression unreadable but serious. He glanced at Jason, Tina, Rico, and Malik, his team, his family. We ain't worried about them, he said, voice steady. We focused on us. They closed one door. We opened 5 more. He reached into one of the open boxes, pulled out a fresh table for all shirt, and held it up. A slow smile spread across his face. Everybody eats. The next morning, the sun crept over Los Angeles, casting its golden glow over the city. But inside Snoop's house, there was nothing soft about the energy. Phones buzzed, laptops hummed, voices overlapped as Jason, Tina, Rico, and Mick sat around a massive wooden table. Stacks of paper, open boxes of shirts, and half-empty coffee cups covered every inch of it. The energy was electric. We just hit 25,000 orders, Tina announced, barely able to contain her excitement. And that's just since 7 a.m. She leaned back, rubbing her eyes, a tired but satisfied grin on her face. Wild. Wild. Wild, Jason laughed, shaking his head. This is historic. He held up his phone. Just got off the phone with Reggie from production. We can triple the order next week if we send him the designs by tonight. Snoop sat at the head of the table, quiet but alert. His fingers tapped against the armrest, his mind 2 steps ahead as he scrolled through his phone. Headlines, comments, mentions, they were everywhere. Snoop Dogg sparks retail revolution with table for all clothing line. Eminence couture on the brink as boycott calls escalate. Then he saw it. He stopped scrolling. He turned his phone around, showing the screen to the team. A photo of Eminence Couture's storefront. Only now, it wasn't sleek and polished. It was surrounded, protesters. People holding signs. Raised fist, no room for racism. Raised fist, we deserve better. Raised fist, hashtag table for all. Jason's eyes lit up. Boy, they out there deep, he grinned. They really brought the signs and everything. They got him shaking, Tina added, arms crossed. They wanted to play games, now they see how serious it is. Jason tapped the table. The wildest part? We didn't even call for a protest. And look. They showing up anyway. He leaned back, shaking his head. You know what that means, right? Snoop nodded slowly. Yeah. It means people ready for more than just shirts. Mick raised his head. More than shirts? Like what? Tina smirked. Like everything. Food, music, art. Places where we ain't gotta fight to be seen. She looked at Snoop. This is bigger than clothes, big bro. This is about space. It's about where we belong. Snoop set his phone down with a loud thud. Exactly. His voice was sharp, final. They act like they control the space. Like they get to decide who belongs. We done with that. We make our own space. Jason leaned forward. You talking about a store? Like a real store? Snoop shook his head. Bigger than that. A space. A place for us. Built by us. They close doors. We open one they can't touch. The room went silent. They had come in thinking it was about making a statement. But now, this was a movement. Tina leaned in, eyes glowing with determination. So what we call it? Snoop didn't hesitate. Table for all. Jason ran a hand over his face, nodding slowly. Yeah, I see it now. They got their boutiques with security at the door, telling folks they don't belong. We flip that. We make a place where everybody belongs. No stares. No side eyes. Just home. Malik said it softly, but the weight in his voice hit like thunder. Yeah, I like that. By midnight, they had the location. A 1,500 square foot warehouse on the edge of downtown LA, exposed brick. High ceilings. Raw, but perfect. Not a store. A statement. Tina, Jason, Mick, and Rico sat around the table, exhausted but buzzing. Papers were everywhere, floor plans, sketches, blueprints of their new space. First event gotta be big, Jason said, stretching. Like, unforgettable big. No soft opening. We coming in loud. Snoop's eyes flickered as he saw it all in his mind, the lines wrapping around the block, the music blasting, the smell of food in the air, the people pulling up, knowing they belong. He stood up slowly. His voice was quiet, but strong. This ain't just a store. This is a message. The next day, news broke. Fire Eminence Couture shuts down indefinitely amid backlash. Fire. Employees came forward. Stories of racial profiling. We were told to watch black customers more closely. Yelp flooded with one-star reviews. Hashtag Table for All trended for the 4th day in a row. Jason was laughing, scrolling through his phone. Bruh. They done. All that elite clientele talk, and now they got nobody. Poetic justice, Rico muttered. But Snoop wasn't focused on them anymore. His eyes were locked on the blueprint of their new space. He tapped the words at the top of the page. Table for all. They closed their doors on us, he said. So we opened our own. That night, he made one last post. Camera with flash a photo of the new warehouse. Cement floors. Bare brick walls. But on the front, a massive black and gold sign that read, Sparkles Table for All, opening soon. Sparkles. No caption. No hashtags. Just the image. The internet exploded. Fire, I'm pulling up day one. Fire, this is history in the making. Fire, they tried to stop you, and you built an empire. Snoop sat back, phone buzzing every few seconds. But he wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking at the future. Door grand opening night. The line wrapped around the block. Music blasted. The air smelled like soul food and fresh clothes. People wore Table for All hoodies, took selfies under a massive gold mural that read, Sparkles everybody eats. Sparkles. Inside? No dress codes. No judgment. Just community. Snoop stood near the back, dressed sharp in black and gold, eyes scanning the room. Jason ran up, out of breath. Unc, you ready? Media's outside. TMZ, complex, even local news want to talk. Snoop smirked. They can wait. Tonight ain't about cameras. It's about them. Then, as the heavy double doors swung open, the movement became a legacy. Fire, and that's how it all went down. But this is just the beginning. If this story inspired you, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below where you watching from. And remember, Sparkles, everybody deserves a seat at the table. Sparkles.